My name is Patricia. I'm 33 years old. I was standing at the reception desk of my fertility clinic, transfer scheduled for the next morning, when the billing coordinator looked up from her screen and said 5 words that stopped my heart. Your account has insufficient funds. $42,000. Gone. Wiped out in a single wire transfer. The authorization code traced back to a joint account I'd opened with my mother in college, an account I forgot existed. She didn't ask permission. She didn't even warn me. She just took everything I'd saved through 2 miscarriages and 4 years of overtime and handed it to my sister for a destination wedding. I had less than 24 hours to save my cycle. My mother, Sandra, had taken my entire IVF fund and given it to my sister for a destination wedding. 4 years of overtime, 2 miscarriages, 1 embryo waiting in a lab. The day before my transfer, my last chance at motherhood, my own mother decided my sister's party mattered more. What kind of mother does that? And how far would I have to go to get my life back? Let me tell you who Sandra was. My mother, the woman who taught Sunday school, who kept a cross-stitch of the 10 Commandments above her mantle, who called herself a devoted grandmother even though she'd never held a child I'd lost. Twice. 2 first trimesters, 2 due dates that became empty hospital rooms. After the second miscarriage, my husband Mark held my hand in the recovery ward, his face gray. The attending physician said my ovarian reserve was declining faster than expected. If we wanted a biological child, we couldn't wait. So we didn't. We started saving. 4 years. I picked up night shifts at the hospital, canceled vacations, sold my grandmother's piano. Mark took a second job teaching night classes. We cut every corner you can imagine. $48,000 in a dedicated savings account earmarked for a single IVF cycle with a donor egg. The egg donor was the most expensive piece, a separate $7,000 escrow payment that the clinic required up front. Non-refundable. The rest covered medication, embryo culture, the transfer itself. We had exactly enough and not a penny more. My sister Brenda, she wasn't saving for anything. Brenda was always the golden child. My mother's excuse factory ran 24/7. Brenda crashed a car at 17. Mom said she was just spirited. Brenda dropped out of college twice. Mom said she was an entrepreneur. Brenda got engaged to a man she'd known 6 months, a real estate developer named Kevin who posted Instagram stories from his leased Maserati, and Mom said it was a fairy tale. Their wedding was going to be a destination ceremony on a private beach in Cancun. 120 guests. A bespoke floral arch. Fire dancers at the reception. Brenda posted a registry that included a $3,000 espresso machine and a honeymoon fund that solicited donations for a Maldives overwater villa. My mother co-signed Brenda's wedding venue contract. I didn't know that at the time. I also didn't remember that, back when I was 19 and leaving for college, my mother had insisted we open a joint checking account for emergencies. I'd left a few $1,000s in it for years, too busy to close it. I forgot it existed, but my mother didn't. She kept that account active, and years later when I transferred a portion of my IVF savings through it to consolidate funds, I accidentally linked it to my main savings. I signed a form I barely read. One oversight. That was all she needed. The morning of my transfer confirmation call, I woke up at 5 a.m. I laid out my clothes, a soft sweater, no underwire, the fertility acupuncturist's instructions on my phone. I practiced my deep breathing. Mark kissed my forehead. "We're going to meet our baby tomorrow," he said. I believed him. I drove to the clinic at 8:15. The waiting room had that sterile lavender scent. I checked in at the front desk, gave my name, my ID, my insurance card. The receptionist smiled. The billing coordinator did not. That's when I heard the 5 words that ended the world I'd built. "Your account has insufficient funds." The blood drained from my face. I asked her to check again. She did. $42,000 had been withdrawn via wire transfer the previous afternoon. The destination account belonged to a wedding venue in Cancun. The authorization code traced back to the joint account. To my mother, Sandra. My hands went numb. My phone buzzed with a text from Brenda. "Can't wait to see you at the rehearsal dinner, sis." I stared at the screen. She didn't know yet. Neither did my mother. But they were about to find out that I wasn't the daughter they could walk all over anymore. I didn't call my mother, not right away. I needed to know exactly how this happened before I heard her lie about it. While the billing coordinator stared at me with that pitying look, I dialed the bank. 12 minutes on hold. A supervisor got on the line, a man named Marcus, and I asked him to trace the $42,000 wire transfer that had cleared the previous afternoon. He read me back the authorization details. Joint account number ending in 7421. My mother's name, Sandra Elaine Morrison, listed as co-owner. Destination account, Villa del Sol Weddings, Cancun, Mexico. The transfer memo said simply, Brenda's wedding final payment. My legs gave out. I slid down against the clinic wall, the phone pressed to my ear. I asked Marcus if there was any way to reverse it. He said wire transfers are final once they clear, but I could file a fraud claim. Except it wasn't technically fraud because she was an authorized signer on the account. The bank's fraud department would investigate, but that could take weeks. Weeks I didn't have. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called my mother. It rang twice. She answered in that syrupy voice she used when she knew she'd done something wrong but wanted to pretend otherwise. Patricia, sweetheart, I was just about to call you. I cut her off. You stole $42,000 from my IVF account. Silence. I could hear the television in the background, some cooking show. Then she sighed. I didn't steal anything, dear. That account was under both our names. I moved money that was legally accessible to me for your sister's wedding. You know how much this means to Brenda. The deposits were due. The florist was threatening to cancel. We would have lost the venue. I said that money was for my embryo transfer. Tomorrow, she said you can always try again next year. Brenda only gets married once. I said I've had 2 miscarriages. My ovaries are failing. There is no next year. She said, Patricia, you're being dramatic. You're 33. Women have bobbies at 40 these days. And honestly, maybe it's God's will that you're not getting pregnant. Have you considered that? Maybe you're not meant to be a mother. The words hung in the air. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I said, you believe that? She said, I believe Brenda deserves her day. You've always been so jealous of her. It's unattractive. I said, I'm going to get that money back, Sandra. Every penny. And then I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you are. I hung up before she could respond. I used her first name for the first time in my life. She wasn't my mother anymore. She was a thief. I stood up. The billing coordinator was still there, clipboard pressed to her chest. She said the total due by close of business was $42,600. If the payment didn't clear by 5 p.m., the clinic would have to cancel the embryo transfer and release my cycle. The embryo we'd already created from a donor egg, the one I'd named in my head, would be discarded. I had 6 hours. I called my sister, straight to voicemail. She was probably at a dress fitting. I left a message. Brenda, Mom drained my IVF savings to pay for your wedding. You're wearing my baby's future on your body right now. Call me back. She didn't. I called my husband, Mark. He was teaching a class, phone off. I left a message too. Call me the second you get this. It's an emergency. I didn't say what kind. I didn't want him to crash his car on the way to the clinic. Then I called Susan. Susan is my best friend from nursing school, the kind of friend who held my hand after my first miscarriage, who brought casseroles without being asked, who once drove 3 hours at 2 a.m. because I was having a panic attack and Mark was out of town. She answered on the first ring. She always does. I told her what happened. Her voice went sharp and quiet, the way it did when she was treating a trauma patient who might not make it. How much? She asked. 42,000, I said, and I need it by 5 o'clock or they destroy the embryo. She didn't hesitate. She said, I'm wiring it. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I said, Susan, you don't have that kind of money. She said, I've been saving for a down payment on a house. I have 52,000 in my savings. You can pay me back when you sue your mother into the ground. And we both know you're going to win. At 4:37 p.m., the clinic's payment system confirmed receipt of $43,000. Susan had rounded up to cover fees. The billing coordinator smiled for the first time that day. The embryo transfer was back on. I sat in the waiting room, Susan beside me, holding my hand. She didn't say much. She just sat there while I shook. At 7:45 the next morning, I lay on the examination table in a paper gown, my legs in stirrups, the ultrasound wand pressing against my belly. The reproductive endocrinologist, Dr. Chen, narrated each step in a calm, practiced voice. The catheter is in place. I'm depositing the embryo now. I stared at the monitor, the gray static of my uterus, and I saw it. A tiny white flash like a falling star. That's the embryo, Dr. Chen said. It's exactly where we want it. I didn't breathe, I didn't blink. I just watched that little flicker of light, thinking of all the money my mother stole, all the trust she shattered, and how none of it mattered in that moment because my child was inside me, and I would do whatever it took to keep it safe. The battle was just beginning. My sister Brenda called me back at 11 that same morning. I was still lying on the couch, Spotify playing a guided meditation I couldn't hear, when her name lit up my screen. I answered, and before I could speak, she started screaming. How dare you accuse Mom of stealing? That money was hers too. She was helping me. Do you know how much pressure I'm under? The wedding is in 3 weeks and the florist was about to cancel. Mom said she had a personal account she never used, that it was just sitting there. I had no idea it was yours. I let her finish. Then I said, that money paid for my embryo to be put back inside me this morning. You're wearing a $10,000 dress and I'm trying to make a baby with my last viable cycle. Instead of apologizing, she went quiet. Then she said, well, you clearly found the money somewhere else, so what's the problem? I ended the call. I blocked her number. I blocked my mother's number too. It was a Wednesday. By Friday, I'd learned the rest. The clinic's egg donor coordinator called me. Her name was Gina, a woman who'd guided me through the donor matching process with the patience of a saint. Her voice was uncertain. Patricia, she said, I received a call yesterday from a woman claiming to be your mother. She said you decided against the donor egg route, that you were pursuing adoption instead, and she requested the escrow account be closed and the $7,000 returned to the original funding account, which she provided the details for. Fortunately, the donor escrow account requires your notarized signature for any release, so our system flagged it and we denied the request. But I wanted you to know. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. She tried to cancel my donor egg. She tried to wipe out the last piece of the puzzle. If she had succeeded, the embryo transfer would have been impossible even with Susan's money. I thanked Gina, asked her to send me an incident report, and then I called the police non-emergency line to file a report for attempted theft and fraud. The officer who took my statement said it was a civil matter with the joint account, but the donor escrow attempt might rise to criminal fraud because there was no joint ownership. He gave me a case number. Then I called a lawyer, a family law attorney named David Caruso who specialized in financial exploitation cases. I sat in his downtown office the following Tuesday and laid out the timeline. The joint account, the wire transfer, the donor escrow call. He asked to see the bank records, the clinic's billing statement, the incident report. After 30 minutes he closed his folder, leaned back and said, we can sue for conversion and unjust enrichment, possibly civil theft. If we can prove intent to permanently deprive, we can ask for treble damages. That means we can get back not just the $42,000, but up to $126,000. He told me to preserve every text message, every email, every voicemail. While the legal machinery started churning, I stayed in the waiting. The 2-week wait after an embryo transfer is a special kind of torture. Every cramp feels like either implantation or catastrophe. Every trip to the bathroom spurs a frantic scan for spotting. I stopped looking at my phone. I stopped reading pregnancy forums. Mark took a leave of absence from his night classes. We lay in bed and watched old romantic comedies and did not talk about my mother. Susan brought groceries and sat with me in silence when I needed it. On day 9 post-transfer, 2 pink lines appeared on the pregnancy test. I stood in the bathroom, shaking, staring at it. I took a second test. Same result. I drove to the clinic for a blood draw. The beta HCG level came back at 212. Solid. 3 days later it had more than doubled. Dr. Chen called it a strong pregnancy. Mark cried for the first time since our second miscarriage. Susan cried too. I didn't cry yet. I was too angry and the anger was keeping me upright. I scheduled my 6-week ultrasound for mid-July and then I did something my mother never saw coming. I gathered every document, the wire transfer record, the bank statement showing the $42,000 withdrawal, the donor escrow incident report, the police case number, the lawyer's demand letter. I put them in a manila folder and I drove to my mother's house. It was a Thursday afternoon, the day before my 6-week scan. I wanted to see her face when she realized I was pregnant and that I was about to take everything back. She answered the door in her church committee polo. She smiled, that practiced "I'm so glad you're here" smile that had fooled half the congregation for 30 years. Patricia, what a lovely surprise. I didn't say a word. I walked past her into the living room, the same living room where I'd told her about my first miscarriage and she'd said God works in mysterious ways. I set the folder on the coffee table. I told her I was pregnant, then I opened the folder. She stared at the folder, then at me. Her smile didn't fall immediately. It flickered, then froze. I said, that folder contains the wire transfer record for $42,000. The incident report from my clinic documenting your attempt to cancel my donor egg escrow, the police case number I filed for fraud, and a demand letter from my attorney, David Caruso, informing you that we are suing for conversion, unjust enrichment, and civil theft with intent to permanently deprive. Her face went white. the way it did when the church organist played the wrong hymn at Easter service. She started to speak. I held up my hand. You don't get to talk. You had your chance to be my mother. You chose Brenda's party over my child. You told me maybe it was God's will that I never become a mother. You tried to destroy my last cycle. You failed. I closed the folder, handed it to her. This is your copy. My attorney will serve you the formal complaint next week. You can hire your own lawyer or you can drain your retirement account to pay me back. Either way, I'm getting every cent. She said my name like a prayer. Patricia. I walked out. She didn't follow me. The screen door slammed behind me. In the car, I called Mark and told him it was done. The lawsuit moved faster than we expected. David Caruso filed in civil court, citing the bank records and the donor escrow incident as evidence of a pattern of intentional financial exploitation. Sandra hired a defense attorney, a woman from her church who specialized in estates and trusts, who argued that the joint account gave Sandra full legal access to the funds. But the judge, a woman named Judge Reyes, saw through that argument quickly. At the preliminary hearing, she noted that simply having a name on an account does not confer ownership of funds, and that the timing of the transfer, the day before a scheduled embryo transfer, demonstrated deliberate, targeted harm. She denied Sandra's motion to dismiss. We went to mediation in September, a full 2 months after my 6-week ultrasound showed a tiny, flickering heartbeat. Mediator was a retired family court judge named Mr. Halpern. He sat across a conference table from Sandra, Brenda, and their lawyer. I sat with Mark and David. Sandra tried to look contrite. She brought a checkbook. She offered to repay $30,000 immediately if I would drop the complaint. David laughed. $42,000 plus treble damages, Mrs. Morrison. That's $126,000, plus legal fees. The offer is not even close to adequate. Brenda started crying. You're ruining my marriage. Kevin says if this goes public, his investors will pull out. I looked at her. You wore a $10,000 dress to a wedding that was paid for with stolen IVF money. You didn't call me back when I told you what Mom did. You deserve every consequence coming your way. The mediation failed. The trial date was set for late November. I was 22 weeks pregnant by then, round with belly, my son kicking vigorously at odd hours. The legal team from our firm deposed Sandra and Brenda. Under oath, Sandra couldn't keep her story straight. She said she thought the account was dormant. She said she planned to repay me after the wedding. She said she didn't know about the donor egg escrow. But the call log from the clinic showed her phone number and her voice. The bank's paperwork showed she had to verify her identity with a branch manager to authorize such a large wire. She had known exactly what she was doing. In October, a month before trial, Sandra's attorney called ours with a settlement offer. She would liquidate her retirement account, a portfolio of mutual funds worth approximately $140,000 after penalties and taxes, and pay us $95,000 in restitution. David negotiated up to cover attorney's fees and the $7,000 donor escrow reimbursement. She would also sign a legally binding acknowledgement of wrongdoing. We accepted. I didn't want the trial. I wanted it over, and I wanted Sandra to feel the weight of what she did. Forcing her to empty her retirement, the same portfolio she had bragged about at family gatherings, the same account she had used to promise Brenda a down payment on a house someday, that seemed like justice. Not revenge, justice. The money came through in early November. We repaid Susan every dollar plus a little extra. She tried to refuse, but I insisted. You saved my family, I said. You don't owe me anything, I owe you everything. On a cold December morning, a month before my due date, I surprised Susan at her apartment. She opened the door in pajamas, hair tangled, mug of coffee in hand. I handed her a card. Inside was a check for the full amount and a sonogram photo. I said, his name is going to be William, but we've decided to call him Liam. His middle name is going to be Susan for the person who made him possible. Susan didn't say anything. She just hugged me and we both cried in her doorway until Mark honked the horn. My son was born on his due date, January 15th at 7 pounds 3 ounces. Perfect. Dark hair, Mark's chin, my eyes. Sandra never met him. I didn't send her a birth announcement. I didn't tell Brenda. My family shrank to the people who had shown up when it mattered. Mark, Susan, Dr. Chen, a few close cousins who had heard the story from Susan and reached out with cautious support. It was enough, more than enough. One more thing happened. The following spring, my sister's marriage fell apart. Kevin, the developer with the leased Maserati, left her for an Instagram influencer he met at a real estate conference. Brenda called me from a borrowed phone, blocked number, voice cracking. She wanted to talk. She said she understood now what Mom had done, that she'd been manipulated too. I listened. I didn't respond, then I hung up. Some things can't be rebuilt. Sandra lives in a smaller house now. She had to sell the family home to cover her remaining expenses after draining her retirement. She goes to the same church, but she sits in the back. People know. Word got around, the way it always does in small communities, and a story about a mother who stole her daughter's IVF money doesn't sit well in a congregation that values family. She writes letters sometimes, always unsigned. I throw them away unopened. Some people ask me if I regret what I did. If I feel guilty that my mother had to sell her house and empty her retirement, that my sister's marriage collapsed under the weight of a lie. The truth is, I feel something, but it's not guilt. It's clarity. For years I believed that family meant obligation, that I had to accept whatever treatment they gave me because we shared blood. But blood doesn't give anyone the right to steal your future. It doesn't excuse telling a grieving woman that her childlessness might be God's will. And it certainly doesn't buy forgiveness when the theft was intentional and the betrayal came with a smile. My son Liam is 2 years old now. He has Mark's laugh and my stubbornness. Susan is his godmother. She's at every birthday, every holiday. She's the family I chose. And that's the thing I want you to sit with. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the one that's meant to raise you. Sometimes the people who should protect you become the ones you need protection from. The question isn't whether you should cut toxic people out. The question is how long you're willing to let them poison your garden before you finally lock the gate. If this story hit you, if you've ever had a parent who chose someone else's happiness over your survival, please like and subscribe. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. I'm Patricia, and this is how I learned that the family you fight for is worth more than the family you're born into. Take care of your gardens.